Welcome to the Emerging Scholar Podcast, Season 1. We hope you enjoy this series of great conversations with leading medical researchers that's designed for graduate students, medical trainees, residents, and fellows to help you on your journey towards your first scientific project. Welcome, everyone, to Episode 13, Season 1 of the Emerging Scholar Podcast. Today, we are chatting with Dr. Janet Branchaw, who's an associate professor, Faculty of Kinesiology at University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education. Dr. Branchaw is an associate professor and faculty director of the Wisconsin Institute for Science Education and Community Engagement, WI Science, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research and programming focus on the development, implementation, evaluation of innovative approaches in science education at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Dr. Branchaw is recognized nationally as part of a large NIH-funded research mentoring network that helped create a training platform for undergraduate students, but also for people running their own labs for how to create an effective mentoring situation. The reason why we brought Dr. Branchaw on was, at the time we were recording this podcast, a very exciting randomized controlled trial of an intervention to increase cultural diversity awareness among research mentors of undergraduate students came out. It was published in the journal Science Advances, and we wanted to understand a little bit more about how do we bring equity, how do we bring culture into the research space. So as we run a lab, as we mentor undergraduate students, as we work with trainees below us, not only do we have a responsibility to ourselves to do research in the right way, but we also want to create a great culture for trainees. I was really excited to talk to Dr. Branchaw about what kind of work is being done, funded through the NIH, to bring equity and cultural sensitivity, cultural safety into the research space for undergraduate students. And so we dive into that and we talk a little bit more about the clinical trial that was published at the time that we did this interview. This is actually fascinating work, and I hope that inspires you to think about cultural safety, equity, and inclusion as you create your own research environment. All right, welcome everyone. Today we have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Dr. Janet Branchaw, who's coming to us to talk about cultural awareness training in your mentor and mentee relationship. Welcome, Dr. Branchaw. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here today?
Thanks very much. I am an associate professor of kinesiology in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I'm also the director of the Wisconsin Institute for Science Education and Community Engagement. And I've been working in research mentor and mentee training for about 20 years, both as a practitioner or director of research training programs, primarily for undergraduates, and then also as a developer and facilitator of training for the mentors of the students in my program. I'm here to share some of the things we've learned about what folks can do to improve their mentor and mentee relationships. And that's on both sides of the relationship, both as mentors and then also as mentees, because it's really a two-way situation.
That's fantastic. Our group is part of a larger group called Enrich, where we're trying to enhance the mentor-mentee relationship across Canada for anyone working in the child health, maternal health area. And to be honest, I don't think we've really tackled this well about how to train your mentors in cultural awareness to foster that cultural safety for mentees. First off, I got to apologize for the smoke that is hanging over the United States right now. On behalf of all of Canada, I'm sorry it went south, but hopefully it clears up pretty soon.
Yeah, we understand. Last week it was pretty smoky in Wisconsin. Now this week it's kind of moved over to the East Coast. So I'm seeing a lot about it in the New York Times. They're paying attention because it's now in their space.
So I also have a kinesiology background, and I'm also very passionate about this. So maybe there's something in kinesiology about this. But maybe just tell me first, what drew you to this area generally of enhancing the mentor-mentee relationship?
So I guess I am a first-generation college student, and when I went through my graduate training program, it was really a mystery all the way through how it was going to work, how I was supposed to behave, in particular, how I was supposed to interact with my research mentor or my thesis mentor. I was in a program, but it felt really unstructured. And I was in a physiology graduate training program. when you go through undergraduate education, it's pretty clear and easy to figure out what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to know and how to behave in class when there's a professor there. And then I found myself in a research lab, and it was a whole new ballgame, right? There were a lot of unwritten rules about the way people behaved and what they did and how they interacted with one another. So the mentor-mentee relationship is really a key relationship. It's at the heart of research training. That training takes place in a whole research environment and a research culture that is pretty unstructured, and there are a lot of unwritten rules in that space. So I got motivated to work in this space because as I figured out and found my way, I was like, why didn't they tell me that? Why wasn't this part of the curriculum, knowing these things or what to expect and how to essentially stick up for yourself, figure out what you need? Because every research training experience is really unique and different. And every research mentoring relationship is kind of idiosyncratic, right? It's between two individuals who have different personalities and come from very different backgrounds. And sometimes they hit it off. Sometimes they don't. It feels like it's the luck of the draw, whether it works or it doesn't work, but it really doesn't have to be that way. We can, and there's a lot of evidence to show that learning how to be an effective mentor is possible. There are best practices, there are approaches and strategies that people can learn that will help them make better connections and be a better mentor for mentees, both who come from backgrounds similar to theirs, and then also for those who come from different backgrounds. So everybody's experience is different. And I started to realize this as I went through my training. And then after I finished my postdoc work, I started working at a Center for Biology Education, and I was working in undergraduate research training. And it became really clear, for as clueless as I was, many of the undergraduate students that were in the programs that I was running were even more clueless, right? Who were brand new to research and were trying to figure out what they needed to do to be successful, trying to decipher what their mentors were doing and what their mentors' expectations were. So how to communicate, how to align expectations, these important things. And many of the students who were in my programs were from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented in STEM research, and they were all doing STEM research. So it was kind of a no-brainer that I needed to start to work not just with the students to help them figure out how to navigate, but also to work with their mentors to help their mentors understand better where their students were coming from, how they were perceiving the environment and their interactions with their mentor in ways that might be very different than what the mentor intended or what they thought was happening. So I teamed up with some people who were starting to develop mentor training on my campus, namely Dr. Joe Handelsman and Dr. Christine Fund. And we started collaborating and developing training. So, and that was like 20 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We've been chugging along ever since, developing training, studying whether it's effective, refining it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. It's such a huge need. 20 years ago, I was going through this myself as a graduate student, and it was sort of like you were mentored by another grad student in the lab who was telling you, oh, he doesn't like it when you do this, and he doesn't like when you do that, and if you want to get a hold of him, do this. And I'm saying he purposely. It was almost always men. We're seeing a nice shift in that, especially in pediatrics, which is great. So before we get into the recent randomized trial that you did that incorporated some new elements of cultural awareness training, maybe just talk generally about the training module that you were working with that was part of this randomized trial that is offered to graduate students, to anyone who's going to be in a mentoring position. So this isn't just for faculty, right? Right. It's for anyone who thinks they're going to be working with an undergraduate student or mentoring someone.
Right. So the whole training curriculum is called Entering Mentoring, and it has several modules. We started out, I think, with 8 maybe, and now there's as many as 12, and they're available online, the new modules. So they cover several different mentoring competencies, and one of the original training competencies was around equity and inclusion. And so when we were studying how effective each of these modules were, what we saw was that people showed showed gains, or they showed learning gains and some intentions to change their behaviors around equity and inclusion. But frankly, those gains were not what we were hoping for. They were not as big as we would have liked. And across all the competencies, they were the smallest. And so it became clear that we needed to do something different in that space. And so that's where the work on this randomized control trial came up. We designed a new module for cultural competency to develop people's cultural awareness in mentoring. And it's based on the multicultural competency model. And you can see more about that in this paper. But what became really clear was that it was going to be a lot more effective if mentors could explore their own cultural identity, right? And many people from majority backgrounds don't even realize that they have a cultural identity because it's just this, they're like most of the other people in their environment. So they don't even think about what they're doing as culture. They don't think it's unique or different. They just think it's the way everybody is. And so much of this training is developing their awareness around the fact that, yes, you do have a culture, even if you are from the majority group. And what is that culture? And how does that shape the way you work and interact with people? How does that shape the environment? And what are the consequences for people who come from different cultural backgrounds, who come into that space and it's not their typical way of interacting, right? What does that feel like? So in large part, we wanted to raise awareness about the fact that people have a culture. Everybody has a culture. And so becoming aware of what that is, and then paying attention when people from other cultures and looking for opportunities to talk about and connect with others in their work environments. And in this case, in particular, their mentees who are coming from different cultures. How do you, in the module, they practice with each other, asking questions about different cultures or different backgrounds and experiences, because often this feels uncomfortable. They think, oh, they're going to think that I'm just worried about the fact that from a different race than I am, and I'm pointing this out. But in fact, it's really important to understand where someone's coming from if you're going to effectively mentor them. So the big difference between the first and second module is helping people understand that it's okay to learn about other people's backgrounds and cultures who come into your research group. And you should take this into account in the way that you're interacting with them, and especially providing opportunities for them to practice that in a place that's safe, and where they won't worry. Like if they make some missteps in the way they speak, it's okay. This is where we're learning about how to talk about things that maybe we've never talked about before. And I think also making sure people realize that these things affect the science we do and the way we do it. Often people are like, oh, none of that should matter. Science is science. It's all objective. Well, the people are doing science and people are all different and there's human interaction. So these things actually do matter. So sometimes the biggest gain for folks who participate in the training is realizing that, oh, actually, I should pay attention to this. This is going to matter for the outcomes of my students and the outcomes of my research.
Yeah, and you touched on a couple of really important things here that I think all of our trainees and soon-to-be scholars need to understand. So first, there are these huge racialized gaps, right? So from high school to undergrad, from undergrad to grad school, and then to faculty. It's a pyramid, and it's so tiny at the top where these racialized groups make it. And one of the things that I'm hearing from you is that it's really important to engage with racialized underrepresented groups to talk about their culture and incorporate that into creating their scientific identity and having it merge with their cultural identity. Now, as a white person, I feel uncomfortable talking to a black student about their cultural identity. And my colleagues might say to me, science is colorless, John. We don't have to worry about that. But the more we work in teams, the more you realize that diversity is critical to answering those questions, which I thought I heard you say, but also that if we want to keep the pathway open and increase the diversity at the top of that pyramid, we need to understand how to create a culturally safe environment for those underrepresented groups to come through. And it sounds to me like the equity and diversity training that was being offered in your module, just talking about, oh, it's just about equity, wasn't enough. And you had to do a bit of a dive into your own biases and your own perceived cultures or cultural beliefs so that you could foster a better training experience for trainees.
Absolutely. And I think your point about you want your trainees or your mentees to bring their whole self to the team, to the research, because they bring different ways of looking at everything, right? We don't want anybody to feel like they have to leave part of themselves at the door when they walk into the lab. We want you to bring your whole self, and, you already have a very strong identity before you come to the training environment. And then you're going to develop new parts of your identity. And you want those things to coexist in a positive way. Right? You don't want to have to be a different person when you're doing research than when you're not doing research. So often, especially when working with undergraduate students and graduate students, when they're just getting started in research, they're exploring, like, what kind of a scientist do I want to be? It's not just that. It's like, what kind of a white scientist or a female scientist or an African American scientist, or, whatever your background is, what are all the identities you bring in? And how are you going to still be those and become the scientist that you want to be? And so that's what mentors, need to create spaces and relationships with mentees that encourage them to do that work, to figure out who they're going to be. Like, that's the whole job of the mentor.
And as a mentee, you want to be seen as a human and as a person, and not just
right? So yeah, absolutely.
Your cultural identity is a big part of who you are. Right. If we think about that intersectionality piece, it adds to a whole other group of elements. But if you come into the lab and we're like, I just want to focus on your scientific identity, you might not feel safe and you don't want to be in that space. And now we're missing out on a lot of diversity in terms of designing, executing studies, engaging with patients in research, or engaging with communities in research. Yeah. So it's a huge loss if we can't do that.
It can feel uncomfortable for mentors, right? They're like, my lab environment is different than the way that I imagined it would be. So part of the training is recognizing that you might feel uncomfortable. You probably will feel uncomfortable some of the time, and that's okay to feel uncomfortable. Like, imagine your mentee is probably feeling uncomfortable a lot of the time, right? So how do you work together and recognize that it's part of your responsibility?
I think you better feel uncomfortable. Like, if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not doing the work. So maybe just explain a little bit how the equity competencies that were part of the original training and mentoring program are different from the newly developed cultural awareness.
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to talk about that is the original equity and inclusion training was really about, it was kind of a safe, objective look at what's happening in the research environment. So we had activities where we'd look at research results that would show, some classical research around, if we show you 2 resumes and one of them is Christine and one of them is Christopher, but they're exactly the same, and people will rate Christopher higher than Christine, right? So it was other people's work. It was other situations. Others were doing these things that were not equitable, or creating spaces, providing opportunities to some groups and not other groups. And just trying to raise awareness that happens, and here's how you can avoid doing that. But it really wasn't diving into or exploring, yourself and where you came from, and kind of that human piece that we were talking about before, and the human interactions. So I do think, people gained and they understood and learned new things about creating equitable environments and ways to do, not just do research, but to set up training programs and things like that would reduce barriers for people from historically underrepresented backgrounds. But they weren't really engaging in, I'll call it the deep personal work of how they themselves, as a cultural being, as a human being, were interacting, or what it was that they were bringing to the environment. How would they personally be contributing to the lack of equity, and what could they do about it? And so I think that the revised module goes there. It's less safe. People feel more uncomfortable when they do it. But I feel like the gains that, and the data show that they're gaining in ways. And importantly, part of this study was asking the mentees of these mentors whether or not they noticed differences. And we did see differences reported by their mentees, which is really important, right? Because people can learn a lot and think about it, and it's between their ears. But are they doing anything about it? Are they acting on it? And in a way that their mentees see it and report seeing it differently?
So yeah, maybe we'll go into the study results, and then I want to take a step back because everything in your module is evidence-based. It's guided by science, right? That National Academy's report this is the scientific evidence for how to improve those relationships. But to get into the study, so I guess every year you enroll hundreds of people, right? Graduate student, maybe thousands of people to take these modules.
Right,
and
right.
They probably do a pre-post survey, right?
They do. Yeah, often they do. Yeah.
So did you leverage that to do this randomized control trial and then talk to us about how that trial was executed and then what you found?
Yeah. So there was previous studies published. So part of the work was also developing scales to measure these changes. So we have a mentoring competency assessment. We have a mentoring cultural awareness scale. So work leading up to this was involved developing scales so we could actually start to feel confident about measuring changes across all the competencies that are addressed in the training. And so data is being collected and has been for a while through the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, which is also at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we don't only do the training or facilitate the trainings ourselves. We actually train other people from around the country and across the world to implement this training. And so we have data from not just people we've trained, but others have trained as well. It became pretty clear that it wasn't going to be feasible to have enough people to do this training or to provide this training for everybody who needs it. And so building capacity for others to do the training was really important. So the mentoring competency assessment has shown us that the training is effective and people report that there's an increase in skills, and their mentees report when compared to those who are not trained, that mentors who have been trained have greater skills in all of the competency areas. So this study, I guess it's a relatively small study where we focused on one module, this mentoring competency awareness module, came on the groundwork of all the prior studies that showed that there were gains across all the competencies. In the study, we measure all those competencies and we see that, as usual, there are gains. There were gains for equity and inclusion, both the comparison group as well as the intervention group with the new module, but they weren't really very, very different until we looked at a couple of specific questions. And so when we dug down, we actually saw that mentees were reporting that their mentors were behaving differently if they had the cultural awareness training versus the equity and inclusion training. And so I don't want to go through every single result that is in the paper because that doesn't seem very useful. But I think importantly, we wanted to know whether or not the mentors reported increases and whether the students reported that their mentors had increases. And we saw evidence of both of those. And we were also curious, there's another exploratory question in the study about what were people's attitudes about cultural diversity awareness before they came in and whether or not that affected the gains. And we were thinking, if they're more open to this kind of training and they are more open to the idea that cultural differences matter in mentoring relationships, that they may achieve greater gains because they're just going to be more invested and open to learning. And our data also supported that. So I think that training is important, but I also think that exploratory research question also tells us that I don't think this should be the only thing that a campus is doing or an organization is doing. Complementing all of this with other kinds of trainings or professional development that help people recognize that cultural differences and differences in backgrounds make a difference in our work. I guess maybe you could say kind of primes the pump and gets them ready to get the most out of trainings like this.
So to summarize, if you were to just evaluate the mentors, a mentor goes through cultural awareness training, then they fill out a questionnaire about cultural awareness, and obviously they're going to say, I'm much better, right? But it doesn't mean that what they've learned or what they've practiced, it sounds like the module had a little more dialogue in it than just didactic, that they can feel like they're better. But
Right.
the real outcome that you found here was that when you interview the mentees, which is sort of
Yeah.
an objective self-report, that the mentees themselves, who weren't in the randomization process, so they actually don't know whether their mentors got the EDI training,
Right.
the equity training, or their mentors got the cultural awareness training. So they're kind of blinded to
Right.
that. So in that
Yeah.
sense, seeing any improvement in the mentees' perceptions of cultural awareness and cultural diversity skill sets would reflect that there's actually an improvement based on the training. And that's what you found.
Absolutely right. See, you're much better at summarizing that.
Uh,
But that's the
my
key,
job.
right? Like
Yeah.
you gotta act on it, right? So
Yeah.
it could be that I think people learn a lot and they report that they learn a lot with both versions of, both the equity and inclusion training and the culturally aware mentoring training. But the mentees reported that they acted on it or they behaved differently.
Mhm.
So they left with the skills and the confidence that they needed to actually do something about it. And that's really what, at the end of the day, we're looking for, right?
Now, were the mentees all from underrepresented groups? So were you trying to find mentor-mentee relationships where there was a difference in their cultural backgrounds?
No, not all of them were from underrepresented groups. Most of them were, right? So they were all participating in summer research programs that targeted serving students who were from underrepresented groups. And so they were, in our student sample, they're overrepresented. There were a lot of students from minoritized backgrounds. And then the mentor pool was, as you were talking about before, was pretty standard, right? It was mostly white or people of Asian descent who were the mentors. So it was mostly majority mentors and mostly underrepresented minority mentees.
So can you just give us a little background about what they learned and what they practiced in this module? And I think Angela Bryars-Winston, who has done a lot of research in this space, was involved in kind of developing this curriculum.
Yeah, so I wasn't part of the group that actually developed the curriculum. I can tell you that and this is outlined in the paper too, so they actually do a little online pre-module that gives them some baseline information similar to what the original equity and inclusion module gave, so that when they come to the training, they have, some basic vocabulary and a common understanding of what those words mean and how they're using them. And then just some background about what the situation is, right? What research tells us. And then they watch a video that is an animation that's not new. It's called the Story of O. So maybe you've heard of this. It's about X's and O's and what it's like to be like if you're an O and you're in a group of X's, or if you're an X and you're in a group of O's. So it's pretty safe and easy way to kind of set the stage and have people think about if you're the one and only who's like you in a group and what does that mean. They complete a self-assessment that helps them understand where they're coming from and review some background information about what it means for people who are interacting from different races in research environments, and also talking about kind of the power dynamics of the mentor-mentee relationship and what that does in this situation, kind of exacerbates what's going on. They participate and discuss a case scenario, and they do some role playing. So it introduces kind of a sticky situation. And then they can practice with one another how they would handle that. Exactly what would I say in that situation and how would I go through that? It's a 2-hour experience, not counting the prior online learning module.
So 2 hours is a short exposure time, but it involves some practice, involves some non-didactic work, right, which I think.
And actually, this kind of training really, it's so much more effective non-didactic, right? I mean, just telling people what to do does not, like, you really have to put them in situations like the little video makes you feel uncomfortable. You're like, ooh, I would really not want to be an X in that O environment, right? It makes you just uncomfortable enough so that you're motivated to think hard about what would I do in that situation and how would I respond. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's kind of provoking.
Yeah. Well, and I think thinking about some of the anti-racism training that I've been involved in. And in Canada, we work a lot with Indigenous communities, and the elders and grandmothers, knowledge keepers are just saying, we're done with cultural awareness. You're racist. And I want you to be less racist. And let's move into that space. So that gets even more uncomfortable, right? Because now you're just facing it right on. There's the reason why the cultural diversity isn't there at the upper level of academia is really, racial oppression for people of color. And so they've asked us to kind of dive into that a little bit more, which is if X's and O's are uncomfortable, then identifying oppression. And that was my next question, was to say, thinking about something like critical race theory, or within Indigenous communities, we talk about truth and reconciliation. And so some of this training will incorporate what the truths are, that some of these structural factors were colonial or were white supremacist derived, and then they're still persistent, or there's still a legacy of it. And then how do we, as the kind of oppressor group, deal with that? And is there any discussion about moving into that space with this kind of work?
Well, in terms of training individuals, most of the focus in the discussion is about your research team, right? Especially if it's with faculty in the group, and creating a space there. But I think kind of the next level up, I think it's going to be important to work with the training program directors, right? Like, and then you could go up, then you're in the department, or then you're in, the school or college. So in this training, it's really about, so people get uncomfortable. They're like, well, what can I do in my space? I think getting them to come is also an issue. They're going to be uncomfortable, but they have to be willing to come. It's a very interesting dynamic when some people are required to take this training, and then others are simply coming because they want to grow and they want to learn. And the sessions play out very differently depending on which group you have. And so importantly, I think you have to meet people where they are. People are going to feel uncomfortable and they're going to feel bad. Oh my goodness, I'm part of the problem. First, I didn't even really realize what the problem was. I kind of knew there was a problem so I'm here. And now that I understand the problem a little better, and I realize I'm part of it, that's really tough for folks. I think the training needs to move. First, you need to find out where people are and go there, and then move from there, right? So the gains people make really depend on, you can have the same magnitude gain, but it might just be like, I wasn't even aware this was an issue, and now I'm aware. Or others will come in and they'll say, yeah, I know all about this, and I'm really interested. I really want to work on strategies, and I want to work on next level change, not just in my lab, but I want to work on the department, or I want to work on the institution, and what can I do? I feel like we have to be working on training and discussing all of this at all of those levels simultaneously as people move along this continuum of the opportunities for action and opportunities to change what they're doing and how they're behaving. So I feel like the next level up at the training program, because this is a community, right? When you bring in a group of residents or a group of graduate students or undergraduates or whatever it is, your trainees, you can build an inclusive and welcoming community there. You can engage all of your mentors in the program in that work and doing that together. So I feel like that's next level up. When we do these mentor trainings, and we do them, across the country, we often have people come, and they're coming from all different institutions. So they're pretty focused on their own research group. But when we go to an institution and we'll work with a whole program or a whole department, there's opportunity for next level change in that space. So individuals have to move, but then getting them to come together to move the institution, then we can start to see broader change.
I love that. Yeah. And I didn't think about that in the trial, but if you did this within your own institution with all of your colleagues, there's a lot of peer influence, and you're not just the one,
right.
Yeah. Go talk to Janet. Janet's the one that deals with cultural awareness in the faculty, right? It's everyone. And that's what changes the culture of your whole department, is when everyone is moving in the right direction.
And you're also holding each other accountable. You kind of get on the same page. I think that happens a lot, where it's like, all the minority students do well in that person's lab. But that can't be what we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we need to be thinking, we want those students from marginalized groups to be doing well in everybody's group. Like, how do we all take it up a notch? People hold their colleagues accountable. right? If this is you don't want to be the one who doesn't get it or who isn't able to function in this space. So
yeah, or if you're a dean or a research lab and people are like, oh, I would love to work with racialized minority students, but they just don't seem to apply to our college. And you're like, well, maybe there's a reason why. What is it about your college that they're not really drawn to? And so shifting this culture of the whole, either your entire research group, your entire department, your entire faculty, starts to initiate the change that, attracts people into that space. Can you just give me a little example? So if I'm asked to do it, I'm not going to say forced to do it, but if I'm strongly encouraged, right? You have to do this training. This is part of your academic promotion and tenure, as an example.
Right.
Or, hey, guys, we're doing this on the Saturday. We have a group coming in from Wisconsin. They're really awesome. If you have time, come and do this. So now we've got two different approaches. And you said you do see differences, right? A little bit.
We do see differences. Yeah.
What are those?
Well, in the United States, our federal funding agencies are now requiring in different programs that mentors be trained. One of the things that's happening is, if you want to be a trainer on our training grant, you have to go through research mentor training. And so I think you have to have really strong facilitators in those groups, because there'll be people who say, I've been doing this for years. I don't need to be trained. And so one of the things you can do with those folks is acknowledge all the knowledge and experience that they do bring to the table. That's the thing about this training. When we're working with faculty in particular who've been doing mentoring a lot, I learned something new, I should say, every time I facilitate from the people who are in the session with me. From the get-go, we encourage them to contribute and participate and share their own experiences. It's more difficult to facilitate these trainings when people feel like they don't have anything to learn. They're just there because they're required to learn. But one of the ways to get them engaged is to invite them to share all that they've learned. And usually by the end, they're saying, actually, this was really helpful. I hadn't thought about it in that way. But it takes a while for them to realize that they can learn from their peers and they can learn from the curriculum. So I think their gains are not as great, although I don't have hard data to show that. Whereas when we train graduate students, for example, they come in and they're just so eager. Yeah. They're like, I want to learn all the things because I haven't done this. And so it feels like we get a lot farther with them, but they start from a very naive place. I think one of the things for people who are a little reluctant, we can show them evidence that if they have a more diverse research group, they will do better science, right? There is a lot of evidence there. So oftentimes people who are kind of reluctant, we can say to them, look, this training will help you recruit, retain, and work more effectively with people from different backgrounds. And that's going to help you do better science and get more research money and, publish more papers, all the things that we all want to do as scientists. So
if you don't want to be a better human, just focus on the science, right?
Exactly.
It's okay. I'll talk to you in your language, but I totally agree. You got to meet some people where they're at. And the other thing that I love to hear from you is something that I think I've seen over and over again is that next generation is so ready and keen for this. And so, this, we're talking to pediatric residents, you're going to be mentoring in the future, right? And the reason I was really excited to talk to you and to show this kind of work to the residents is you guys got to get trained in this too. Like, don't perpetuate some of these bad mentoring practices, right? Get yourself ready to do this kind of work. And as more and more diverse students are coming in, we want to make sure those pipelines are wide open for you to rise to the top. And that'll happen if our residents and our trainees engage in this in a really deep way.
I agree. When we talk to seasoned, really good mentors, we will often say, why are you here to get this training? And they'll say, well, I had a great mentor and I want to be a good mentor because it made such a big deal. And then on the other side, we'll also have people who say, I had awful mentors and I need to make sure that I don't do what they did and I need to learn something different. So for the people who are willing to come and interested in coming, but who are more experienced, that's often what we see. Younger people, or people earlier in their careers, I should say, are interested in developing these skills because they're just learning how to do it. But they also recognize, this helps me understand better how it is for my mentor. Something that happens with the graduate students, they'll be working with an undergraduate and they'll have some challenges. And along the way, they start to appreciate their own mentors they say, oh, I'm having trouble. This one student is driving me crazy in this one way, or I'm not sure what to do. And then I think about my own mentor and say, oh, she's got 8 people that she has to, I just have one.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how hard this is to work with 8 different people, right? So they start to also develop some empathy for what it is. And in that, they learn how to be a better mentee.
Mm-hmm.
So they learn how to mentor up, how to help their mentor help them.
Oh, that's also great.
Yeah, we have a whole parallel curriculum called Entering Research for mentees.
Do you fly up to Canada? Do you drive up to Canada? Wisconsin's not that far.
Do we drive?
I'm pretty sure we share a border. Yeah, we'll open that up too and say, maybe one day we will have, your group traveling across Canada to provide both of these. And just to add to what you were saying, I keep thinking that there's this karaoke effect. So you've heard a song a million times, right? And you're like, oh, I love that song. And so you get up on stage and you go to sing it and you're like, I'm terrible, right? And I'm thinking about it in the writing context, working with trainees who are moving from reading a million papers to now having to write their first paper. It's like there's no translation. It's like you didn't even read the papers. And now I think the same thing, right, about mentoring. If you had great mentors and now you're like, I want to be like that, right? And then you're thrown into the mentor experience. You can't really identify what it was about that relationship that would make you a good mentor. It's practice. It's like karaoke. It's like you've got to get really good at it by having the skill sets, maybe having the boundaries, but then putting yourself inside of it.
Yeah. It really is idiosyncratic. I mean, there are definitely best practices and strategies and things like that. But at the heart of it, it's human interaction. And so listening is so important. And then there's a lot you can do proactively, but then you also have to be reactive and ready to be flexible, change what it is you thought you should be doing to meet the needs of the mentee. I mean, at the end of the day, in my mind, someone who works with research trainees mostly, the success of the trainee is the measure for me of the quality of the mentoring relationship. Like, is the mentee, and how do we define that success? Like, what is it that the mentee wants to achieve? Where are they trying to get? What are they trying to do? And the only way that's going to work is if the mentor is listening to them, understands where they're coming from, helps them figure out, what do I need to do to get to where I want to go? And not have preconceived notions about, oh, everybody who comes in my lab is going to go to this track. They have this kind of background, and then they're going to go out in this way. So every mentee-mentor relationship is different because every trainee who comes in is different.
Yeah, that could be like the follow-up of your trial, which is those undergraduate students, how many of them decided that grad school was the place for them, or medical school or whatever, because they felt like they were seen, that their own personal identity was celebrated.
Right.
And brought in, so that as they develop a scientific identity, it merges together with their cultural or their personal identity, and they see a place for them in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that long-term tracking, that's hard work, but at the end of the day, I think that that's really what matters. Are we changing the composition of all the folks who are at the top of that triangle that you were talking about? Yeah. Does that look different 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
God,
I think
so.
if this stuff is working,
yes,
it should look different.
And it's our job. Like right now, we're at the top of that pyramid, and it's our job to create that space so that looks a lot different than what it was when we came into it.
Right.
Okay, so for any trainees, this was wonderful. And for trainees looking to either go beyond after your training or to get into this space for the first time, any recommended readings, resources?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd recommend is the National Academy's report on the science of effective mentorship that came out, I think, 2019, 2020, I can't remember now on the top of my head. But that is a great kind of summary of the literature on this. So then you can find many, many things there about what we know about effective mentorship in STEM. This is all in STEM. And the other thing I'd recommend is all the trainings that I'm talking about are offered through the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, or CIMR, and that's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But it's a national center, so we provide trainings for people all over the country, and we customize trainings depending on what institutions need or individuals need. So when trainees feel like they're ready for some training, they can go there. There's also some self-paced modules that the University of Minnesota offers, which also on the border with Canada. So right down the street, right? Yeah. Those are places to start. And there's lots of links and references in those.
And we'll put a link to that on our website, especially the chapter on diversity and inclusion in mentoring and cultural awareness. And actually, when I was going to go through the National Academy's module or the whole training textbook, they do have podcasts. They have a series of podcasts that they've created on mentoring. So we'll put a link to that too. And if you're really keen on this, we can share that. Yeah,
there's an online guide that goes with that report. Yeah, so there's like a website, there's podcasts, there's lots of great stuff there. So I'd forgotten about those podcasts. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're really grateful for you taking time to share that with us. We'll put links to these resources. We look forward to anything that's coming through your research institute in the near future. And any final words for residents or trainees out there that are hoping to become great mentors one day?
There's training available, but it's mostly about being open and interested and listening to your trainees and not feeling constrained. So be creative and work as a team with your mentee. You don't have to know it all, work together.
Yeah, be vulnerable. That's excellent. Okay, well, thanks again. And we look forward to having you. Maybe we'll have your team up into Canada to do some training with residents
Fantastic.
In the next year or so. So that'd be great. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very insightful conversation with Dr. Janet Branchaw about a really interesting clinical trial and methods on how to properly bring equity and culture into your research space as a research mentor. Be sure to join us for episode 14, where we continue this discussion in the final episode of season 1 with Dr. Jonathan Jackson about how to bring equity and inclusion into the design and delivery of randomized controlled trials and other clinical epidemiological studies. Thanks for listening. The Emerging Scholar Podcast was recorded in the UMFM studios located at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. This is Treaty 1 territory, the original homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Manitoba is also homeland to the Anishinaabe, the Dakota Ayote, and the Dene peoples. We acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. As a settler scientist working in health research, I acknowledge TRC Call to Action number 18, that health inequities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are the direct result of colonization. Winnipeg is the center for reconciliation in Canada, and where we are speaking from today is at the crossroads of Canada's history and Canada's future. We are 3 kilometers away from one of the most sacred meeting grounds for Indigenous people on the plains and within Turtle Island. We are also several kilometers away from one of the last residential schools in the province. We are working collectively on reconciliation with youth, elders, and community leaders to heal from the trauma of colonization, past and present, honor the original treaties, and create a Canada that addresses and eliminates the inequities and injustices of the past and present to create a future for Indigenous children to live and thrive. On behalf of the team at the Emerging Scholar Podcast, we want to thank Osani Balkaran for the great production for our opening and closing themes. We also want to thank UMFM 101.5, especially co-producer Jared McKediak for technical assistance and production on this project. We also want to thank all of our guests for the discussion and the insight that they've provided. Once again, thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Emerging Scholar Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and umfm.com.